Hey guys, Trev here from SpineWise. Today I want to talk to you about cholesterol, and we get these labs done from cholesterol, but what do they actually mean and how do you actually interpret them, and are the standard cholesterol tests the ones you really need to be looking at? So we're going to look into a fair bit of detail today about things that you can look at and things that you can interpret, and just give you a bit more of an understanding as to how you can actually be addressing some of these things, and give some nice hints and tips as well. So if you're someone with cardiovascular issues, if you had a high cholesterol reading or a high triglyceride reading on your labs, then this is the video you want to watch to give you some insights into what that means and how that works. Likewise guys, if you love our information, please share, like our page, subscribe to our YouTube channel. All this stuff is better ways we can get information out. The more we can get information out, the easier it's going to be to help more and more people. Anyway guys, let's talk about cholesterol labs. So if you've ever been to your GP and they've ordered a series of blood tests to check for your cardiovascular health, this is the general pattern that you'll come up with. So most of the time there's a full blood exam with this, which includes like your cell markers and stuff like that. But generally what they'll look at is glucose, usually fasting, sometimes a HbA1c, which is like an average over the last 3 to 4 months of your glucose levels. Your total cholesterol, your LDLs, which are classified generally as our bad cholesterol, but that's actually inaccurate. I'll talk about that in a sec. HDLs, which are so-called good cholesterol, and triglycerides. So this is the general consensus of what comes out from a normal set of cardiovascular labs. So let's have a chat about some of these things and what these things are. So our fasting glucose is really important because our fasting glucose really tells us something about what our system's doing from an insulin resistance perspective. It's not a very accurate test, but it does give us an insight. We know that once we cross above 6 to 6.5, we start talking about type 2 diabetes. We have functional ranges, and from the functional ranges, we generally like seeing this somewhere in the order of about 4.8 to 5.1. There's some variance on that, and there's people have different views on it, but it's generally been the area that we've seen that most people seem to be functioning the best. Our total cholesterol, to be honest, total cholesterol actually has not much bearing on anything. So cholesterol is actually an important part of the human body and part of our physiology. And we get a little bit confused and we start thinking cholesterol is bad, the lower it is, the better. But it's not actually that simple. To start with it, cholesterol is a fat, but we don't have fat floating around our bloodstream. So we don't have cholesterol floating in the bloodstream. So it's not a matter of if you eat fat, you're going to add high cholesterol. It doesn't work that way. Anytime you were to have fat just floating around in your bloodstream, this is what we'd call an emboli, and embolis tend to block things that cause strokes and things like that. The reason for it is fat is a fat-soluble substance, water is water-soluble, so it's a bit silly for me to say that anyway, but basically the two are opposites. So they don't like each other, so they'll push each other away. So if you have balls of fat floating in the bloodstream, the net result of that is you're going to get little globules form, and eventually you're going to block an artery somewhere and give you either a heart attack or most likely a stroke of some sort. So what we actually have is not cholesterol that floats in the bloodstream, but what we have is lipoproteins. And lipoproteins are fat bound to protein, okay? So it's a cholesterol protein complex. This is not something you get from your diet. This is something we manufacture primarily in the body. In fact, anywhere up to about 2/3 suggested of cholesterol, total cholesterol in your system is directly as a result of liver changes. So the whole reason we do that is we have our cholesterol bind to these proteins to be transported around our bloodstream, and the main reason we do that is so that if we do get irritation or damage to the arteries, we can plug those gaps straight away. The problem with it is, the smaller those particles are, the more likely are they actually to plug things up when they shouldn't be, and that will create problems for us. So our LDLs are actually low density lipids, our HDLs are high density lipids, and it really does relate to the sizing of the particle. And the smaller we get, the more dangerous those particles are. And I know I've been a little bit oversimplified, but just want to keep it simple for you guys so you understand it. So the smaller particles are generally classified as being bad. The higher density particles are generally classified as being good, because they can actually also have a bit of a cleansing effect and kind of scrub the arteries clean as well, our HDLs. Triglycerides are the big ones for us from a cardiovascular perspective. Triglycerides are stored fat. So when you consume carbohydrate, your carbohydrate gets converted into energy, as in terms of sugar, in terms of glucose. It gets converted into triglyceride for fat storage, as well as into other products for glucose storage as well. So our triglycerides really have a direct bearing onto how much fat we are storing, and this really has a lot to do with insulin function and can create a lot of cardiovascular damage. So that's a basic cardiovascular profile that we have. What we're going to do is we're going to take this, we're going to expand it out now. We're going to really look at what would a fantastic profile look like to get more information from it. So there's a few things we're going to add to this. So the first one is a fibrinogen test. So fibrinogen is really to do with the thickening of the blood, and it really tells us, while it's not directly related to that, it does give us some idea of how thick the blood is and how coagulative to an extent it is. That's not the right word, but the actual flow of blood flow. So we want to have our fibrinogen levels fairly low. We don't want them sky high. The higher they are, the bigger the problem it's going to be. And I'll talk to you about how to deal with this in a second. Lipofraction tests are becoming more and more common nowadays. There's starting to be more awareness of lipofraction. So what a lipofraction is, when we're looking at these categories for our total cholesterol, our LDLs and our HDLs, we look at bad and good, and this is not exactly the case. So our LDLs actually have about 7 different categories and size particles of cholesterol within them. So we can actually get all of those particles tested, and it's actually quite important because not all of those particles are actually bad for us. So only 4 out of those 7 particles really create major problems for us. So we can actually break this down and look at all of those particles in what we call a lipofraction test. And a lipofraction test is a breakdown of each of those 7 categories of cholesterol. So you can actually see, are your LDLs being high because of the larger size particles which aren't dangerous being enlarged or higher in number, or is it the smaller particles that are quite dangerous that are a problem for us as well? So the lipofraction test is a breakdown of our LDLs, which tells us a lot more about it. Our oxidized LDL, now this is really important. So when we look at our LDL counts and we look at our arteries, and let's say we've got an artery in the middle here and we're starting to get deposition of LDL cholesterol or lipoproteins into it, there's 2 things that really become important for whether that becomes a cardiovascular risk in the future or a significant cardiovascular risk. The first one is, are the particles being laid down small particles or not? And we're going to learn that from our lipofraction test. The next thing is, we need to be able to actually calcify. We need to be hardening that cholesterol, turning it into plaque, for it to really become a big problem for us heading forward. And this is what happens when you oxidize those cholesterol. So this is what an oxidized LDL test does. It actually looks at what rate are you converting those bad cholesterol into plaques. Okay, and again, that's a bit oversimplified, but it's a nice little idea, a nice little summary. So oxidized LDLs is something that we look at in people who have lipofraction problems. In other words, test it up and having the wrong type or the bad types of cholesterol that are being elevated. Our HDLs, same thing as we said here. HDLs give us a good indication of whether we're processing good cholesterol correctly or not. Triglyceride, as we spoke about there, so triglyceride tells us a lot about our insulin function and our future risks cardiovascularly. The other one that we haven't put into this side here is homocysteine. So homocysteine is a very, very, very important substance that is produced by our liver. Now the problem, or the reason why this is so important, is homocysteine actually has a tendency to damage the inside wall of the artery. So it actually tends to create damage going through the artery wall. And the problem with that then is, as blood moves through the artery, you can get little whirlpools created around those little cracks. And the result is it can open the artery up and start increasing your risk of things like aneurysms, which can lead to things like stroke and the like. So one of the things that we see commonly, people with elevated homocysteine can start getting damage within the arterial wall. And if you're getting damage in the arterial wall, that potentially can lead to laydown of cholesterol, which if you're oxidizing can lay down to plaquing. Okay, I know we're oversimplifying things here, but there's a whole lot of stuff which can link homocysteine to cardiovascular damage as well. The other thing on another side of thing, we spoke about this in one of our other videos earlier about homocysteine being linked to methylation problems. So we're talking about liver dysfunction when we're talking about homocysteine. And this is a really, really big, important thing as well. And then when it comes down to fasting glucose is important again, as we spoke about here, because simply the fasting glucose will give you an indication of whether or not you potentially again have insulin resistance. So there's a nice little summary on the things that you need to look at when you're getting your labs done. If you have any questions with that, or you're having problems with your cholesterol levels and you want some advice or anything, please feel free to post down below, or otherwise send me a message. Always happy to help out in any way, shape or form we can. I'll jump on next week and we'll show you another video on exactly how these things fit in and what you potentially can do about them as well in terms of trying to get your cardiovascular health up and better. Anyway guys, if you have any questions, send them through to me. Otherwise, I shall catch up with you in the next video. Bye for now.